like to welcome Dr. Gwendolyn Brooks and Mr. Lonnie King to Shiloh High School and the Shiloh Brotherhood Mentoring Group. Dr. Gwendolyn Middlebrooks of Atlanta. She was a student leader of the sit-in movement in Atlanta as well as Spelman College. Dr. Martin Luther King was her mentor and Daddy King was her pastor. She retired about 6 years ago as chairperson of the Education Department at Spelman College. Mr. Lonnie King, Morehouse alumnus and former president of the Atlanta chapter of the NAACP. He encouraged Julian Bond and a few other friends at Morehouse to help him organize a boycott at Rich Is, the founder, key organizer of the AUC Center student movement against racial discrimination.
For 5.5 years, Price High School and Carver High School in Atlanta, Georgia, I coached basketball and track. My major in undergrad was health and physical education. You didn't say that, I want to tell you that. I loved high school, teaching high school. Was a homeroom teacher and all that stuff. That was important. You want me to start?
Well, I don't want to be, I don't want to say the man has to start.
Man first.
Okay.
Right, my name is Gwendolyn Harris Middlebrooks, one of 4 children. I was the third. And I went to, I finished high school, public high school. Went to public school, kindergarten through grade 12, Atlanta Public School. And graduated from Spelman College. After Spelman College, I got a master's and a doctorate. I started teaching immediately. Had to, lived in a housing project in Atlanta, lived in Carver Homes. And been working since I was 10, running odd jobs, doing odd jobs for people and keeping children and that kind of thing, and loved every minute of it. I thought sometimes when I might have had a job I didn't want, at least it gave me an opportunity to find out what I didn't want to do. But anyway, that was my beginning, and I got involved in the civil rights movement while I was a student at Spelman. After having experienced a lot of acts of discrimination while I was growing up, riding the bus. My family did not have a car, so we were always on the bus. That gives you a great education. And I'll stop right there.
My name is Lonnie King, and pardon my hoarseness, but
Miss Minor, your visitor is up at the kiosk. Miss Minor, your visitor is up at the kiosk.
I could jump in and tell him I met Lonnie in high school. He was older when he was running for student government president that he won.
I came to Atlanta when I'm the only child, first of all, let me say that. Born in a little town called Arlington, Georgia, which is down right at the Alabama line. Came here when I was 8 years of age. And my mother put me in the YMCA every day. I had to go there every day. I had to report that I was going to work after school. What I did not understand then was that my mother was putting me in an environment that would have put me around people who could impart to me some education outside of what I was going to be getting from my 9 to 3:30 or 8 to 3:30 classes. I lived in Summerhill, which is, you refer to Summerhill, I guess, because the name is still there. Went to Howard High School, finished Morehouse College, and went there for 1 year, and then went to the Navy because my mother she was going to kill herself trying to raise the money for me to continue my education. She was a $5 a day in coffee I made, and then when it was time for me to go for my second year of school, she took a second job at the American Red Cross, scrubbing floors at night, which meant that she was getting about 4 or 5 hours of sleep per night. I would never wanted to go to the military because I felt like I had done a thing to the Germans and the Japanese and they hadn't done anything to me. But when I saw my mother's health begin to fail and she was killing herself, I said, Mama, hold on a second. I can help myself. You've gotten me this far. Let me go to the Navy or the Army or somewhere to get the GI Bill. And so she cried, but she understood. And so I went to the library the first colored library in the South was on Auburn Avenue across from is at the corner of Auburn and Hilliard. So I went down there, and I wanted to find out which area of the service had the highest casualty rate, because that's the one I was not going to. And so I found out that the highest casualty rate was in the Army, the Marines. The lowest casualty rate was with the Air Force, and the next one was the Navy. Well, the Navy, I could go in on a kiddie cruise, get it going the day before you're 21, and then you get out the day before.
Anthony Mayfield, please come to the front kiosk. Anthony Mayfield, please come to the front kiosk.
And you get out the day before you're 21. So that's 3 years. Air Force One is 4 years. I went into the Navy. Oh, my mother had to sign for me because I was a minor. And as we signed the papers, she said, I'm signing these papers to the recruitment officer on one condition, that my son not become a seagoing busboy. I knew what she was talking about. But what she was talking about is that she didn't want her son to go into the military and become a waiter, to become a steward's mate. So she'd done a little research on the Navy herself. So I found that when I went there, they didn't put me in the deck for in the servants pod. They put me in something called the deck force, chip and paint. And so I learned then that you got to fight if you're going to intend to straighten things out in this country. I spent 3 years in there, and I kicked a lot of butt while I was there, and came out as an E5, equivalent to a staff sergeant. So I did very well, but it didn't come easy. I had to fight, petition, and kick butt. I came back to Morehouse in '57, and I stood in line one day, as we always did, for almost all daylight. And in front of me was a young guy who had just come back to town, or wherever he was from, Philadelphia, I guess. And we talked all day long because it was an 8-hour deal trying to be registered. And I learned that his name was Julian Bond. And so I remembered that name because we had a long conversation, because he had been an intern for Time magazine when he was in high school, and he was an English major. Flashing you forward to February the 1st, 1960. I'm sitting in the Yates and Milton drugstore, which was like a little coffee shop that we used to have. And I'm reading the paper on about the second and third.
Coffee shop. Are you sure?
That's why we ate sandwiches.
I know.
Yeah, every day.
We call it a coffee shop now. All right.
And on breakfast. But anyway, I was sitting there, and the Greensboro 4 had just sat in a day or so earlier, and it was in the Atlanta Constitution. And when I saw it, something clicked in me. And I went to a guy named Joe Pierce, who was my good friend, whom you knew. I said, Joe, we ought to make this happen here. He said, yeah, you're right. I said, you see that guy over there? I said, his name is Julian Bond. When I came back to town, I met him. He can write. If we're going to put this together, we need to have somebody to write it too, to explain our side of the story that's going to be slanted if we don't have our side written. I got
Ms. Foster, your visitor is at the kiosk. Ms. Foster, your visitor is at the kiosk.
I got with Julian, and we got together. We started forming the movement. And I'm going to miss all those things just to tell you this. We have been battling rather quietly and in the courts for years trying to end segregation. We didn't end, and also discrimination too, but certainly segregation. The NAACP under Mr. Du Bois, W.B. Du Bois, and Ida B. Wells and others formed in 1909 to fight to end lynching in this country, of black men primarily. They hired W.E. Du Bois to be the editor of the Crisis magazine, which is still publishing. Mr. Du Bois, Dr. Du Bois wrote something called The Souls of Black Folks, and in that book he talked about the talented 10.
Justin Howell, will you please report to the front kiosk? Justin Howell, please report to the front kiosk.
Need to be available to teach the other 90%, because we were still trying to come out from under the throes of slavery, or slavery by another name. So the NAACP was formed in 1909, and they took a strategy called class action lawsuits. This gentleman right here might have been independent, a barber, or what have you, but he was black, or Negro, or African American. They would let him file the lawsuit against the system for all the rest of the folks in this room who were similarly situated. Why was that? Well, he was representing himself and the class. Because if the rest of you also took action like that, you'd lose your menial jobs. So, but he was independent as a barber, depending on black clientele, so he could make it. So that kind of strategy was in place from 1909 until 1960. At the same time, black men had been going to war, fighting meritoriously. And in 1914-15, Du Bois, asked black men to go to the military to fight for this country. And if we did fight for this country, we would be getting a blank check that could be filled in by America when we came back, because we would have shed our blood to help this country. A lot of folks went in, they got all kinds of medals from France. Many of them came back when the war was over, and some of them were lynched before they got home in their uniforms. Let me flash you forward. World War II. 1.1 million African Americans went to that war, mostly from the South. Segregated army. When they came back, some of them got injured. It was back to business as usual. Now, we fought for democracy and what have you for Europeans and what have you, but when we came home, we couldn't enjoy those same democratic principles. In fact, there were German prisoners of war that were being guarded by black MPs. The prisoners of war could go into the white restaurants, and the black MPs had to stand on the sidelines with their guns outside, guarding them. That's just how convoluted this thing was. Flashing you now to 1960. When those young men sat down, it was like a volcano erupting that had been dormant all those years. A little steam comes out, and you know it's active, but it hasn't erupted. But I think all these centuries of deprivation, the centuries of discrimination, all of a sudden, it was like John Locke said at one point, there is nothing on earth so powerful as an idea whose time has come. The time had come for African American young people. Let's face it now, when you go to war, it's young soldiers who go to war, not old people. Old people plan the wars, but young folks fight it. So in 1960, when those 4 young boys sat down, the volcano began to erupt on college campuses that were African American. And by June the 30th, we had 70,000 plus students saying, we want freedom, and we want it now. The signs have to come down. Now, there were no laws on our side, folks, at that time, except a higher moral law, human rights. And you read about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the Bible, and what they told King, what's his name, Nebuchadnezzar? What they told King Nebuchadnezzar. The civil law might be against us, but we are appealing to a higher moral law. And that's what we did in the 1960s. What we were trying to do was to say America is not going to change unless we make it change. And we knew we couldn't get the laws changed without a mass group of people coming together, united in a non-violent way. You couldn't have won the battle with a violent thing because we didn't have enough guns. So we had to have the guns that flow from a morally correct process, morally correct philosophy, ideology.
Oh, right there. Now what I want you to think about, he's saying 1960, but our background in school was that we were at a segregated school. We got books that came from white schools. We got the old books. We got hand-me-downs. They had the names of the white students written in them when we got them. We had all black teachers. We had no white teachers, no teachers of any other race, just African American or black or colored, whatever. We rode in the backs of buses. We couldn't go into theaters where white people sat. We couldn't go in restaurants where white people sat. That was the climate That was our experience from preschool through grade 12 and at Spelman and Morehouse at that time. We had a few people of other races, but that was what we had experienced to this point in 1960.
Atlanta was a place where the white power structure had never actually talked to any black folks leaders, except their mayors. They took whatever they wanted to do in the town that related to us, they did it through the mayor, Mayor Hartsfield at that time. So to give you an illustration of what I'm talking about, we would have a combined campaign for something called Community Chest, which is now United Way. So they had a colored division. So they'd go to all these churches and what have you to raise money from the coloreds. And when they would come to the Dinkler Plaza Hotel, which is no longer there, but it used to be downtown, they had this big meeting, and then they would call on the colored representative to hand the colored collection to one of the assistants to the powerful people. And then they would announce that the colored division has come up with so many $1,000. You couldn't even sit down. So finally, out of Act of the Netherlands, Bob Woodruff, who had Coca-Cola, said, we need to at least get a table for the colors and let them come in and sit down and make their own report to everybody. So they got a table. Guess where the table was? In the back right next door to the kitchen. Atlanta was full of black people who had power, but it was derivative power. It was called paternalism, where they mastered a system that a man named James Henry Hammond developed in Aiken, South Carolina, and he wrote a book on it. And the key to it was, this is how you control the Negroes in this book. So that was the kind of atmosphere that we had to deal with. Because when we started challenging the white power structure, the so-called black power structure felt threatened. Because we were going to now substitute Dr. Middlebrooks and people who were young like her, who'd be dealing with the powers that be, and they didn't want that. So it was an ethnocentrism kind of thing, us versus them. So Dr. Middlebrooks and thousands of other students, about 5,000 in all, when you put all the schools together, we came together and united into 6 schools under one umbrella called the Committee on Appeal for Human Rights, called the Atlanta Student Movement. With that particular combination, we didn't go down there one school one day, another school another day, because that would be counterproductive. It would play into the hands of the white power structure. But we had to fight the white power structure, the white community, and the appointed paternalistic black folks too. But there was one difference. We had the troops. We had the troops, and we used the troops to get the population behind us. So we put a boycott together. Because my major was economics, I learned a lot about how the system works. I learned that the department stores in Atlanta, Georgia, or around the country really, operated on a margin of profit between 8 and 10%. Dr. E.B. Williams at Morehouse said, if they lose below that, they're losing money. The population in Atlanta, blacks, was 33%. So, therefore, if you lose 10%, 12% of the business, you're going to impact the bottom line. We put out something called the Student Movement in You, 20,000 copies per Sunday at all the churches, asking them to don't go downtown. Then we formed the Atlanta Inquirer newspaper, which is still running today. It took over from the mimeograph machine you never heard of the mimeograph machine, have you? I figured we'll tell you about the mimeograph machine. It was the forerunner to the newspaper and the internet that you all are dealing with now. But let me quickly say this to you in conclusion. I held a press conference and asked all the citizens in Atlanta, African Americans, to send me their charge card at Richard's department store. Now, would you send your charge card to a college student, even to this day? 354 sent me their card, and I put them in the bank at Citizens Trust. I just learned, Dr. Middlebrooks, there were hundreds of more that were sent back to the store, which I didn't know about, but I looked at that records out there at Emory, and they're there. the records, people sent them in. So what happened? The young folks got to the soul, to the innards of the African American community, and they backed us. Not the rich folks, but the fast dollar, like the small folks. Richest department store lost $10 million by their own admission over the Christmas holidays of 1960. Wow. That's what forced them to come to the table, to sign for the first time an agreement to integrate anything in the South. It hadn't been done before, it hadn't been done since. We were a part of that great movement, and the unfortunate part about what I want to say to you is that we really went to sleep, because I personally believe that once you change the law, in the long run, people will change their overt behavior because they're accustomed to doing things a certain way. It doesn't happen on race. It doesn't happen on race. We've got to do more than just change the law. Because once you change the law, people can try to change it back. And that is what has been happening here. We put our drive for freedom on cruise control, believing that people will do the right thing. They put that drive to stop us and reverse things into overdrive. They have gutted affirmative action. They've not gutted the Voting Rights Act. They have stacked the Supreme Court. There have been 17 judges appointed since 1970, once they started this conservative movement. 12 of them are right-wing conservatives. 5 were Democrats. They've taken over the presidency, but then, lo and behold, when President Obama became president, they went, wow. They called him a coon. They called him all kinds of names. But I submit to you that when the history of this time is written, President Obama will be the most effective president that this country has ever seen. And he did it with an anvil on his back, because the white Congress did not back him, so he had to use the executive power. See, there are 3 ways to run America: through the president, through the Congress, or through the courts. So Obama used his executive power, and periodically he's been backed up by the courts. So that leaves the other guys out there in that field. Let me tell you this. We made a mistake in 1960. We should have inculcated into our discipline African American history. If you're a Jew, you know all about Jewish history, all the way back to the Bible. If you're white, you know all about the history of the French, the Germans, you name it. If you're Chinese, the same thing. But we are afraid to tell our story. Did you realize there's not another race of people on the face of the earth who have gone through the kind of oppression that we've gone through, and still we rose. And still we do things that nobody else can do. We have a great lineage. We've been kings. The kings and queens of Western Europe sent their children to be educated to a place called Timbuktu. Timbuktu. One of the greatest and richest men who ever walked the face of this earth was a man named Mansa Musa. He was an African. He was worth billions of dollars when we were going around with pennies. So the point is, how has people from the West been able to get away with this? They have done it by capitalizing on something called propaganda. Sure. Negative propaganda. Since you are young folks, I want you to write something down. Write down anti-Negro propaganda or anti-black propaganda into your Facebook account or wherever you want to look, internet, and you'll be shocked at how many hundreds of images you get. Now, that didn't stop to a great extent until about 1960. Again, that's the watershed. But if you look at it, you will find that in every way we could be demonized, it's in those cartoons. It wasn't the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was MGM. It was Lowe's. It was Warner Brothers. It was people who made The Birth of a Nation. We were always minstrel types. There were no scientists. There were no doctors. Nothing like that. So, if there's one thing I want to say to you, we need to be proud of our history. The first person to shed blood for these United States of America before it was formed was a black man. And his name was Christmas Attucks. Have you seen his name or picture on any dollar bills around? Have you seen any monuments other than Boston for him? King Cotton. You've heard about King Cotton. Do you realize that black men made the
Ms.
industrial
Crumbly, please contact the main office. Ms. Crumbly.
made the Industrial Revolution? Because when Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793, that changed everything. Slavery was supposed to end in 1808, folks. If you go back and look at the Constitution, that didn't happen because they saw that they had to use black men now with the agriculture, cotton, and black men developed the best brand of cotton ever made. It wasn't black women. They were helping out there, supporting the family, but it was the black men. It was your people who looked like you who knew how to do this. The only ones that came close to us was in India. That was second grade. So we have a tremendous legacy. You need to know it because we should not think, oh Lord, my folks were ex-slaves. Yes, be proud of it because we rose from being ex-slaves, building the Industrial Revolution that created England and this country. And therefore, we did it non-violently, lovingly, and we have not been appreciated for it. I maintain that the best way for us to do things now is to go out here and take advantage of the rules that we made, register and vote and those kind of things. There are 700,000 African Americans in this state who can register and vote who have not done it. So I can't really sit here and just blame the white folks. We've got to blame ourselves. The other thing is that 7 out of every 10 babies that are born who are black, the dad is not around. If you have some children, young men, stick with those children. If the woman was nice enough to sleep with, then I think the baby ought to be nice enough to help take care of it. I'd like you to marry me if you would, but if you don't do that, at least don't have another young black child running around in this system without some kind of help from the generation before him.
When does leadership begin? When do the ideas start that you can make a difference? Remember I said, I was an 8th grader when I met Lonnie. We were members of the same church and in the same school. But
What church, Dr. Middlebrooks?
Ebenezer Baptist Church. Just an accident that I was there. I came to Atlanta from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and ended up at that church because there was a young lady who lived across the street from me, a girl, and her mom asked me if I could go to church with her. Happened to be the church where Martin Luther King's father was preaching. He was a child. Lonnie's family was a member down there. Now, he talked about his idea for economics. He was dealing in elements of economics when he ran for president of the student body at David T. Howard High School against, guess who? Vernon Jordan, and won. Vernon was courting all of the seniors. Lonnie gave candy, goodies, appealed to the 8th graders. What's the difference between the 8th grade class and the senior class, economically, in numbers? 8th graders outnumber the seniors.
8th, 9th, and 10th.
8th, 9th, and 10th graders, yes, that's true. Wasn't that smart? You know, a lot of times people think high school students don't have that many new ideas. I don't have leadership ideas. You know, where does leadership begin?
Dr. Middlebrooks, may I be
Yes.
polite? I gotta give the credit to where it belongs. My mother, that was a mother's idea. Joseph
Yay for the
Pierce,
women.
Joseph Pierce, my good friend, who's now gone on, came to me and asked me to run for SGA president. I said, against Vernon. I said, you have lost your mind. Vernon had a suit for every day, car, his mother was rich,
Yes.
you name it.
Do you all know who Vernon Jordan is? If you don't, just write this. That's okay not to know.
Put that down.
Vernon Jordan.
Write
Right
down
there.
Vernon Jordan
Jordan.
and look him up.
Yeah, anyway, he's an African American who's a Brahmin. He's a lawyer.
And I want you all, excuse me for
Went to
being
Purdue.
impolite, I want you all to Google Lonnie King and Dr. Middlebrooks tonight or tomorrow so you can see how famous these two people are. I'm sorry.
So I said, Joe, I can't run against this guy. I live in the alley.
He was an Eagle Scout too. Vernon was an Eagle Scout.
I said, I can't do that. And so he said, but you can beat him. I said, no. I went home to talk to he said, go home and talk to your mother about it. I went home and talked to my mother about it, and she started crying when I told her I couldn't do it. I said, Mama, I can't do this. She started crying. And she said, I've done the very best I can, but I don't want to see you hurt by my circumstances. She said, I dropped out of high school, got married, fell in love, you name it. And she said, but I think you can beat him. I said, Mama, come on. This man is, no. And so she said, well, I work for this white woman who has a son who's 2 years older than you, and his clothes are still there in the closet. Let me ask her, can she give me some of those clothes? And I'll make sure you have clean clothes every day. She said, but you can win. I said, well, how can I win, Mama? She said, well, the 8th, 9th, and 10th grade students far outnumber the 11th and 12th. She said, and I hate to tell you, but the girls tend to get pregnant oftentimes by the 10th grade, and they drop out. She said, so therefore, you have the numbers. But then she said to me, your campaign ought to be, let's keep our feet on the ground. Because Vernon was going to be up here in the atmosphere. And she said, and you go around and try to shake every 8th and 9th, 10th grader's hand you can. And so one day, and this is, I don't think you know, Glenn, one day I was going down the hall, talking to the 8th and 9th graders in between classes, campaigning with me and Joe Pearson and me. And I ran upon this little lady who had on my button and Vernon's button. That caught my attention. I said, young lady, who are you for? She said, well, I'm dating him, Vernon, but I like you. I said, okay. I said, next time I see you, you need to have on his or mine. She said, okay. I saw about 2 weeks later, she only had on mine. I said, oh, well, you got off the fence. She said, yes. I said, well, what is your name? She said, my name is Alice Harris.
He married. I fast forwarded.
So not only did I beat him in the campaign, but I also took his girlfriend too. He hates me to this day.
Anyway, when in 1960, after Lonnie, the idea was born, after we saw what folk did in North Carolina, they got the plan together, and I saw him on campus, and he asked me if I would agree to join them and if I would get the students at Spelman that night, because we were going to sit in the next day, to join the movement. So I stayed up all night going from dormitory to dormitory trying to convince everybody to join, because remember, we needed numbers, and we were to meet at a certain place on the AU campus, and we met there the next day. They had told us what we should wear. You would never see anyone in pictures of picketers wearing blue jeans and tennis shoes. We were to be business casual, because the idea was that we didn't know if there would be violence, and the idea was if you're dressed well, people will treat you better. And so we got all the information out, what you were supposed to wear, where we were supposed to meet, and we met the next day and divided into groups. I had no idea which group I would be in. I got in the group that went to the state capitol. There was a restaurant in the state capitol. Remember, we were going to restaurants. And the leader of that group happened to have been Otis Moss, Jr. And we were also told, given one other piece of information that was very important, that when they lined us up to get in the police car, we were to line up a male, a female, a male, a female, because we knew people had done their homework. They weren't going to put one person in a police car, they put two. And we wanted to make sure a woman, a female, would not be in the police car alone. And when I was arrested, I was asked to get in the police car first at the state capitol restaurant. And I sensed somebody coming in behind me. It ended up being Otis Moss. So I was arrested with Otis Moss, and they had put us all in a mass holding cell after that. We had synchronized our watches and we agreed to sit in at what time?
11 o'clock.
11 o'clock. And so.
Now tell them why.
Didn't have digital watches.
Did you all know why? 11 o'clock?
Why?
In 1948, television came to the South, to Atlanta,
See how
Nashville,
smart they were?
Birmingham, and Miami, I believe it was. We knew that the 6 o'clock news would go all over the country potentially. And we wanted to make sure that every demonstration that we did hit the 6 o'clock news. Because again, we're a propaganda campaign now. And we realized that if we get the word off the plantation, which is what the South was, to the other part of the country, there was a good chance that we could begin to get some support from other parts of the country. So that's why we did it at 11 o'clock.
And we didn't have cars, most of us, so people in the community, business people in the community, housewives who had cars, helped carry us down, so we had drivers. And we circled my group, in the streets, drove around the state capitol until the appointed time we were to go in. And we were arrested, and the rest is history. The night before we were to sit in, people had just fought to get Easter Seal to give money to open that camp. And we were each assigned to a child. Our pastor, Martin Luther King Sr., said, almost nobody's going out there to volunteer, so I went out there to volunteer with my babysitting money. I rode the bus, and I had this little boy who could not eat and get nourishment unless you took a spoon and put it in his mouth, and you had to put the spoon in there and then hold his lips together while he chewed, or the food would come out. And I could remember my mother telling me, close your mouth when you chew, Gwen. Don't chew with your mouth open. And he couldn't. He didn't have enough muscle control to close his own mouth. And I could hear her telling me how rich I was. I had my fingers, my toes, my eyes. I could close my own mouth. And when I was riding the 3 Irving Street bus from the west side of town for Washington Park that day, and I was sitting there, I didn't realize I was crying. The lady next to me asked me why I was crying. And I was saying I'm crying because I'm so thankful, because I realized how rich I was. That was what my mother, your mother tells you things, and a lot of times you don't think what you should about it. It impacted me. That was what she was trying to tell me. No, you don't have a lot of money in your pocket, but you've got things that are worth so much more. You got your mind. You can think of ideas. You can do things for the right reason. You can lead, and you can follow people who are doing the right things.
In the interest of time, we're going to open up the floor for a few questions. Let's not be bashful, guys.
Don't all speak at the same time.
I wanted to ask, did you ever get assaulted or treated violently when you were doing the sit-ins?
Yes. That was a grocery store in West End, Atlanta. And we decided to picket this grocery store in order to get them to hire blacks other than as laborers, basically. But it had a large black clientele. So I announced that we were going to go out there and start picketing the following Saturday. So they had a paper called the West End Star, and they ran a front page story, basically in red type, that Lonnie King, the communist, is going to be coming out here on Saturday. Let's meet him. So when we got out there were 3 of us. It was me, Charles Black, and a guy named Frank Holloway. And there were hundreds of whites across the street. Jeering, called me all kind of names. And then right here, as we were going up and down the picket line, was a small white guy who had his hand in his pocket. And I didn't know whether it was a gun or what it was, but I knew he had something. So I had gone up maybe 4 or 5 times. All of a sudden he lunged at me and threw acid on me, which ate into my face and ate up my shirt. And I was blind. I'd never had that kind of pain before. So a guy named Ronald Yancey was passing by. He was also a Morehouse man. He stopped his car, grabbed me, and then he took me to the service station across the street. They refused to let me have any kind of water on me because I was burning. So then he ran me down the street. I couldn't see, but he said, just hold on to me. To that service station, he pleaded with the man to let him put some water on me. And so they did. And then the police came, and they took me the kissing way home to the hospital. They took me all around Simpson Road and what have you, instead of going straight to the hospital. It was let the nigga burn just a little more. So I had those burns for a while, but they didn't blind me because I had on shades. Had I not had on shades, I'd be blind today. And of course, I've been pummeled. Southern Bell Telephone Company had an operator, not an operator, but a lineman, who jumped out of his truck once when I was on a demonstration and started pummeling me. Now, I could have knocked him out, because what I haven't said to you all, that I was a heavyweight boxing champion in the Navy, undefeated. I could have knocked him out with one blow, but we were in a nonviolent movement. Now, if he'd have caught me around the corner, away from the cameras, I would have done him in, because I never accepted nonviolence as a way of life. To me, it was a tactic to be employed. Did I answer your question? Yes. And there were some other people. These people were so vicious. One young lady got a cigarette put out on her shoulder. People got spat on, you name it. Now, we didn't have anybody killed, but I will tell you this. At the height of that boycott, there was a school in southwest Atlanta that got bombed out. So even though this is a city where you're saying it's too big, we were too busy to hate, they were hating all the time. That was just a marketing strategy to bring northern money into Atlanta. Questions? Any more questions? Did I answer you, sir?
Yes.
Did
Dr. Middlebrooks,
anybody bother you?
No.
Man? Okay.
Dr. Middlebrooks, I have a question for you. What is your most memorable experience about your relationship with Martin Luther King Jr.?
Well, and Lonnie knew him too. I worked in his home. I was hired by his wife, Coretta, to babysit with the kids and do odd jobs. I thought he was very friendly. You know, a lot of times I'd look at pictures and statues of him. He was a very friendly person. He was always very friendly to my girlfriends that I brought by the house. If I had to come over and do something, I'd bring one with me or something. He liked to talk to people. When he was killed, I thought about the many nights I saw him standing out on the front porch of the house, holding onto the balcony, just looking out at the neighborhood. He would come down in the middle of the night sometimes and go outside and just stand there and look at people. He enjoyed people. He enjoyed talking to people. It wasn't difficult, obviously, to get to him. And a lot of times you see pictures of people and you read about them, you say, this person might have been aloof, might have had a particular set of friends, but he wasn't like that at all. And I really appreciated that about him. He was interested in where you were going and what you were doing and who your parents were. Those were the questions he asked my girlfriends while they sat and waited for me to do chores at the house. I thought that was really, really nice. One funny thing happened. I picked him up. I think my driving probably compelled him to get somebody to chauffeur him around. Because I would pick him up from the airport.
But you were his first chauffeur, though.
Yeah, I was. And I would pick him up from the airport. Coretta would say, be going one direction. She'd say, would you pick him up? And that was during the days when you could actually go to the gate and get someone. And we'd be walking around along trying to get to the car through the airport. People never knew I was with him. People would be around him trying to talk to him and take his picture. And we got to the car. He drove this car. He never owned a new car. Never did. I would say, why in the world do we have this ragged car? I think it was a Plymouth. It was blue. It had a hole in the floor. And I like to wear high-heel shoes. And I had to be careful when I put my foot on the brake. My heel would go down through the hole in the floor. Sometimes we'd stop at a light. I could see the ground through the hole in the floor. A hole about like that. Well, when we got in the car this particular day, teenager I was in college, I listened to the radio all the way there. and I just turned the ignition off and the radio went out. Well, he threw his bags in and he got in the car and we were riding along, and when I turned the ignition on, Ray Charles came on singing Baby What I Say. And I was trying to turn the radio off and he was saying, no, let it play. I want to hear what that man has to say. I want to hear what that brother has to say, he said. I thought that was very funny. I felt very embarrassed because he was a man of the cloth, and here I was listening to this wild blues station. But he loved every minute of it. And he liked having fun with people, and people don't get that side of him. But he was very easy to get to know, very comfortable person to be around.
Let me add to that. I'm teaching a course at ITC every Saturday, and I've asked Dr. Middlebrooks to come on the 7th of November. I'm teaching a course on Martin King and his legacy philosophy. I want her to come and talk about those 4 years that she worked for him, because if you look at his history, Martin King was a complex man, but there were several parts of him that made up the whole. Martin King was an excellent pool shooter. He could go to the pool hall and whip some of the sharks down there. He was a good swimmer. He was probably the greatest orator of the 20th century. The only person that could possibly move more people was Adolf Hitler. And he moved him because he had the military behind him. Martin King only had the moral force of his voice and his message. And I would commend to any of you, if you get a chance to read some of his stuff, read his letter from Birmingham jail to the white preachers. Read a speech that he made in May 17, 1957, in commemoration of the Brown decision, where he talked about, give us the ballot, and we will elect judges. Give us the ballot, and we will elect sheriffs. Give us the ballot, and we will elect representatives who will represent our interests. Right. One of the great speeches that he made. I'm going to tell you about that because we now, 50-some years later, we still have to say, give us the ballot, because the 700,000 folks in this state somehow or another haven't gotten the message. Haven't gotten the message. The man was an oracle, a man ahead of his time, and in my view, I know the rest of his family. God himself must have picked Martin King to come in here at that moment in history. But if you reflect on history, young men, every 50 years or so, beginning in 1800, there was some African-American man who stood out and was pushing for liberation. It was Gabriel Prosser at first, who led that first revolt. Then later on it was Frederick Douglass, who said power gives us nothing without a fight. It never has, and it never will. And then later on, 1903.
Some of the presidents of the colleges in the AU Center got word, and information came back to us that students who participated would be put out of school, but we figured they couldn't put everybody out of school. And I spent a lot of time trying to convince all of the top level honor students in Spelman to go, because I figured they definitely weren't going to put them out of school. We got them involved, Marion Wright Edelman and all of those folks. But at any rate, the idea was to get numbers. And I can tell you the feeling, it's a feeling that you can't imagine when you're about to do something so positive and wonderful, and you look behind you and you see other people joining in, and you finally realize that united, you can do a lot of things that you can't do alone. And of course, people ask me, well, why did you go? Well, I didn't question it. I lived in a segregated society. I rode on the bus to school every day, standing up, because we couldn't sit down. I was a part of a group of young people who lived in Carver Homes. Carver Homes was a government housing project at that time. And there was a bus, buses would take us to town. No such thing as a school bus at that time. And there was an apartment complex at the end of the bus line called Village Apartments. And that apartment complex was totally occupied by whites. So when the bus came down the hill to get to us, it was already occupied with white people. And they would seat themselves, one to a seat, next to the window. Because see, they didn't want to be near the aisle.
Anthony Mayfield, Please report to the main
Because
lobby.
if they were near the aisle, they would be near us. At first, I thought they were just being mean, and then I figured it out. They just row up next to the window and keep their faces turned outward. And we discussed it, you know, we discussed what we were gonna do, and finally we decided, the law says we can't sit next to them, but it doesn't say we can't put something in the seats next to them. So we talked about what we were gonna do for months. And then I actually got with a group, Albert Brinson, and we were talking to Martin Luther King Sr. about it. He said, just make sure you don't touch them and make sure you're polite. So one day after we'd been talking about it, I was almost at the back of the bus and somebody bumped me the days before the book bags. Now, we didn't have backpacks. We carried our books in our arms, and sometimes we would take an old belt and wrap it around them to hold them together. Somebody bumped me and gave me their books, and I put them in the seat next to us. Now, when the pile of books got very high, we would hold them. Now, the books on the outer seat, the white person is sitting next to the window, and the bus would continue to roll. And finally, the person would get up. The person got up, and as the person got up to leave, we said, thank you very much. And then we could sit down. Because we could sit on the back of the bus, but if they were seated on a seat in the back of the bus, you couldn't sit there. That went on for a whole week, and I never shall forget how I felt that Monday morning when I got on that bus. All the white people were seated to the front double. A peaceful thing that we did. We got together and made a difference. So these kinds of things were happening. So when Lonnie said it was an idea whose time had come, we were taking a lot of chances in opposition to the way we were being treated. And so when the opportunity came to do something that would help change some of the laws that were really unjust racially, I was definitely going to be a part of that. I didn't even hesitate. My mom said that when she heard it on the news, before she got the call from the jail, she knew she was going to get a call from me because she knew I was going to be there. So sometimes young people feel very powerless, but, you know, don't give in to those feelings. There are a lot of things you can do. Keep your eye on how this world can be better and what difference you can make. I always tell people, young folk are people. You know, we kind of think they're teenagers. We don't get the idea they're people too. They're going to become adults, and they have some of the brightest and most beautiful ideas. And you are in charge of where you're going and what you can become. My mother, like his mother, worked as a maid for $5 a day in car fare. My mother, on the day we were circling the Capitol, getting ready to sit in, was supposed to be at work, and of course I was supposed to be at school. Who should be standing on the corner of the right at the Capitol, at the light, as the bus went around? Now they had given us, as the car went around the block, they had given us instruction, don't do anything to call attention to yourself. This is not a game of jokes and fun. This is very serious, no laughing, try not to talk. And we were circling the block, and as I saw her, I'm wondering, why isn't she at work? God, I hope the light changes so the car doesn't stop there. It stopped right there in front of her. And I sheepishly did this at her. And she said later, she was wondering, what was I doing in that car? And I was wondering, what is she doing on that corner? But so it was just very interesting. People asked me, did you tell your mother? No, I didn't tell my mother I was going to do that. But my mom was so proud of me, and all the business people who came later in the evening to pay our bill, to pay our bail, put our bill for the bail, were so proud of us and the fact that we had done something that they couldn't do without losing their jobs. And so it gives us a great sense of pride to feel that we were a part of something that kind of made a difference in this world, really made a difference.
Let me give you my summation, and then we'll take questions. First of all, I was the founding chairman of the movement in Atlanta. We forgot to tell you that. That's number one. Number two, we didn't just integrate the lunch counters. Atlanta integrated the theaters. We pushed for hotels. We pushed for the we made them take down the wall. There was a patent wall that was put up. Our folks made them take that down so the black folks could move beyond. We filed a lawsuit to integrate all the recreational facilities in town. The only thing that we didn't integrate because it had been done earlier was the golf courses. We also began the kneel-in movement here, where we went to white churches in August of 1960 and shocked them because the idea was 11 o'clock was the most segregated hour in America. And so we said, let's go out here to these white churches. I mean, you should have seen how these good Southern Christians reacted when we showed up at their churches on a regular basis. They wouldn't let us in most of them, but then we finally broke it down because it moved from Atlanta to Savannah to Florida and then all over the country, just like the sit-ins had. Why did we do this? If you're a Christian, let me tell you, I think we did it because it was the right thing to do. We were tired of America having this duality, preaching one thing and practicing something else. We also had concluded that since this place had been segregated for hundreds of years, by that I mean by custom as well as by law later, they weren't going to change. Why should you change a good thing? If you can get people to work for almost pennies when you had to pay them, or work for nothing, you know. We also realized that the white America had never voluntarily passed any law or made any court decision that did not come from pressure. You can, I challenge you, find any law that you are able to enjoy that white people voluntarily say, you know, we've been treating black folks badly. Let's go out here and do a better job. That doesn't happen. It has never happened, and in my opinion, it never will until we become citizens who participate as we should in the voting process. Because the clothes you wear, the amount of money that you make, the school that's here, the desks that are in here, the chairs, it's all flowing from a political system in some way or another. And we have to understand that. Now, the other reason why we did this was because we knew you were coming. We didn't know what your faces were. You were nameless, faceless descendants of ours who came from Africa. The problem with it, though, is that the other descendants from Africa who don't look like us because their folks moved to a colder climate, they don't realize that we all came from Africa. Whether you're black, white, blue, or green, that's the mother country of everybody. At least that's what the white people told me in those textbooks. So if we're all Africans, then what's all this about? You're not going to change it, though, because those folks who have gotten what they call the advantage, they have something called white privilege. Now, they're not going to give that up without a fight. And I'm saying we can have a nonviolent fight because that's the system that we live in. So I've enjoyed having a chance to come and talk to you. I knew metaphysically and theoretically you were coming one day. I now see you. But what I want you to also realize is that freedom is a relay for us by necessity. And in order to have freedom, every generation will have to run its leg of that relay as far and as fast as they can, and then hand that baton to somebody else. I have done my part. I'm still doing a few more things. I'm 79, but my mind is 25, so I'm still running.
Age.
No, I'm telling mine, not yours. I'm telling mine, not yours. Not yours. But what I want you to do is realize that you are living at a point in time when you are representing who comes after you. And the question is, are you going to prepare a better table for them to eat from? It's on you. You and you.
There is leadership in each of you. Even when you follow, you lead people in the direction you want to go, and you must go. And you must think about that. You must understand the power that is inside of you, though you are very young. And that's what makes it so beautiful. You have so much time to make a difference in this world. And
Are you going to give them a chance to ask some questions? Yeah, okay.
yeah, it's so, I want you to really, really feel that very, very strongly. It was my mother who first told me how rich I was, even though we were living in a housing project. And I took a job, and I'll be quick with this, working with some handicapped children from Easter Seal one summer because they had the black people.
You get W.B. Du Bois, who talks about the talented tenth, and that's what you are. You need to get education so you can go back and teach the other 90% on how we can make the American dream ring for them too. And then, of course, later on, Martin Luther King Jr. Now, who is the next Martin Luther King? It might be in this room. It's time.
It's to Zion.
It's time. It's been 50-some years, so it's time.
And you must vote. I remember hearing Martin Luther King Sr., Martin Luther King Jr.'s father, talk about voting in the church when I was 10. I couldn't wait to be 18, not so I could drive. I wanted to vote, and I promised myself I would always vote in every election. That to me was like the coming of age when I could vote. It talked about how powerful we would be if we voted, if we stuck together, if we got together behind ideas and demonstrated our beliefs and our support by voting. Very essential.
Any more questions? We could not have been that thorough.
It's your voice.
Question,
I got a
yes,
question.
sir.
What do you think holds us back today from coming together and representing one sound voice politically and exercising our political views as a people?
Well, first of all, we have the delusion of freedom. That's the first thing. Secondarily, we were taught during the time of slavery not to work together. Now, I know that those who would say that not working together can't be in your genes, but I think it's a learned behavior that can be passed down from generation to generation. We also have the delusion of inclusion. Because the signs are not there, we tend to say, well, we know we're free, but you're free in a circumscribed environment that mandates that if you are white, you're on top with white privilege, and if you're other than white, you're on the bottom with less privilege. The laws have been changed, but the attitudes of the country and with the predominant race is still the same as it was in 1861. All they did was incorporate and inculcate Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart. That is the relay that has been run by whites against blacks in this country. This is the most vicious country in the world when it comes to the issue of race. South Africa got the bad rap. They sent missionaries over here to learn how to put the apartheid system together in 1948. Because we had the model, we had the plans, and we helped South Africa to do it. How can you do it? Number one, learn your history. Number two, it needs to be nonviolent, but you got to understand that there are two kinds of energy. One's called potential energy, one's called kinetic energy. You have the potential energy to change the world, but you got to figure out a way to turn potential energy into kinetic energy. How many of you are science majors? Any science majors in here? You know what I'm talking about, right? Potential energy versus kinetic energy. You got to find a way to make the steam strike the wheel, and that's the wheel of progress. Were you asking something, sir? I thought you were. I got the signal through mental telepathy, and that's why I called it. Ask me. You going to ask a question? Yes, please ask me.
He's autistic.
Oh, okay. Okay, I thought you might ask something.
It might take a minute for him.
Okay, sure. I'll come and help you. Okay? What would you like to know?
When Lyndon Johnson was president, what did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. do?
Okay, I got it. His question was, when Lyndon Johnson was president, what did Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. do? Lyndon Johnson succeeded John Kennedy because of the assassination. But he came from Texas. Johnson did. But his grandfather came from Columbus, Georgia. But they took advantage of the Homestead Act of 1863 to go west and claim land out there. Lyndon Johnson was a racist senator from Texas. But once he became president, he decided, with some pressure from King, to at least be fair. So Lyndon Johnson was the one who shepherded all the Way Society programs through Congress in the 60s. King was pressuring him all along. When he signed the Voting Rights Act bill in 1965, he correctly predicted that when I sign this bill, we're going to lose the South for the next 60 years. He understated that. We're going to lose the white South probably for the next 1,000 years. So Lyndon Johnson, sir, did work with Martin King under pressure from Martin King and the public to pass the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Housing Act of 68, the Great Society, Model Cities, Office of Economic Opportunity. But he did that under pressure, and there are still some whites in the South who realize that this stuff is wrong. And Lyndon Johnson had the moral force coming from us to give him the, I guess you said, platform to do the right thing. Did I answer you, sir? Okay.
All right, in the interest of time, we're going to let our student leaders kind of move forward with the meeting. Jamie McLaurin is the co-president. If you could just touch on the first agenda item and let them know about the contact you've made with Harvard about our trip in March.